Hello and welcome to Mysteries of the Kingdom of Heaven. My name is Raj Singh. In this video, we're going to ask the question, was God cruel to test Abraham? Genesis 22 verse 2, and he said, take now thy son, thine only son Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains which I will tell thee of. So was God cruel to put Abraham through this ordeal? If you like these videos, like, share, comment, and subscribe. Subscribe to see all 15 plus videos to date. Remember, you don't need me, you don't need man, you just need to seek the Holy Spirit and become a disciple and receive the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven. God bless. This video has come about from a question raised by a viewer, ACP, and ACP's question is, why would God test one of his own children? Why would he do such a thing? It seems like such an atrocity for him to test the faith of any of his followers. Think of the anguish and the torment that Abraham must have experienced. That seems like such awful cruelty. It seems so cruel for him to tell Abraham to kill his son. Now, this is an excellent question. We've answered in the video, Abraham stretched forth his hand, that it was God teaching Abraham there was faith, yes, but behind that was also that God came first, and once he had the fear of God, then he had the knowledge and the understanding of the holy. But there is a question, was this a cruel act? And actually the Bible does give the answers, and it took me a while to figure this out. And so I was going to combine this with another video, Abram rescues Lot, and then it became its subject unto its own, and only because of ACP. So this video is to answer that question. Just to make something very clear, I couldn't answer this question, ACP. I really couldn't until this morning, Sunday, the 10th of October, when all of a sudden all the Bible verses just came to me. And so the all glory goes to Yeshua. There's nothing here that I have done, as in all the videos. Unless it's a revelation, I actually cannot put something on. And this was a question that I didn't have revelation on. And I was finding it was very difficult for me to answer ACP. So again, just to point it out, this is all glory to Yeshua. Isaiah 46 verse 9, remember the former things of old, for I am God, and there is none else. I am God, and there is none like me. Verse 10, declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times the things that are not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand, and I will do all my pleasure. So to answer this, we're going to see this from God's view, the end from the beginning. And let's see if God was cruel to test Abraham. So, was God cruel to test Abraham? Well, let's look at Genesis 21 verse 33. And Abraham planted a grove in Beersheba. We'll stop there. Now, this is to get the location of where Abraham was in Genesis 21. At the end of Genesis 21, verse 33 and 34 were the last verses there. Now let's go to Genesis 21, verse 1. And it came to pass after these things that God did tempt Abraham. And so that's where in the first verse where God tempted him. So that means that Abraham was in Beersheba when God tempted him. And in verse 2, Genesis 22, verse 2, now then God says, take now thy son, thine only son, whom thou lovest, to get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering. So we're going to now look at Moriah. So now we know the two locations, Beersheba and Moriah. And so on the right-hand side, we can see Beersheba and Moriah, and it says, Abraham offers Isaac. So now let's look at verse 4. Then on the third day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place afar off. So when it took him 3 days to not even get there, and so it was a pretty tough trek to make, Abraham with his son that he was going to kill, and all the thoughts and things that would have been going through his head. The terrain was just as tough in those days. There wasn't any roads. So that combined with the heaviness in his heart, and the questions would be, what have I said? What have I done? All these things that we even ourselves ask. We've done something, we've said something. Why is God telling me to kill my son, which took me, until 100 years old? I never had this son. And all these uncertainties, and you'll be playing it in your mind. So as the question says, is this a cruel test to put someone through this 3-day journey and torment someone? Now, some of the questions that would be tormenting Abraham in this test that God put him through would be from Genesis 22, verse 2, and where God tells him now to take his only son Isaac to Moriah, and then verse 3. And Abraham rose up early in the morning and saddled his ass and took 2 of his young men with him, and Isaac his son, and clave the wood for the burnt offering. Okay. One of the questions that would be coming through my mind is, I haven't told my wife that I'm going to kill my son. Now, another question would be, what if I come back without my son? How am I going to explain myself to Sarah? After all, it took us 100 and she's 90 until we got this son. And then in verse 5, and Abram said unto his young men, the 2 men, abide ye here with the ass, and I and the lad will go yonder and worship, and come again to you. Now, when I look at this, verse here and the last part of this verse, where Abraham says, and I and the lad will go yonder and worship. Now, this part, and come again to you, he sort of leaves this open, and he doesn't say, I and the lad will come again to you. He just says, and come again to you. Now, for me, it means if I come alone, then you will get to that part when we get to it, and if I come back with my son, then I don't have to go any further, just a sigh of relief, and it'll be good. I don't have to explain myself to the 2 men or to my wife, which would probably be not an easy time in the Abraham household. Just to clear things up, when I said Abraham has to explain to Sarah that he killed his son. Of course, it means our son, but yeah, in recording these things, you do say things that are a bit out, but just take them as they come. Genesis 18, verse 18, seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. Verse 19, for I know him, that he will command his children and his household after him, and that they shall keep the way of the Lord to do justice and judgment. For any nation to be a great and mighty nation, there has to be justice and judgment. If that nation is run by crooks and wicked men and has anarchy, then that nation can never be a great nation. So let's see the meaning of justice. The quality of being just, righteousness, equitableness, or moral rightness. And the meaning of judgment. Number 2, the ability to judge, make a decision, or form an opinion objectively, authoritatively, and wisely, especially in matters affecting action, good sense, discretion. So let's see what the Word of God reveals, that what Abraham had to learn to become a great and mighty nation, and was God cruel to test Abraham? Just to point it out, that nations that have law and order, that no one is above the law, from the judges right down to the politicians, right down to the common man. And if they have one law that applies to all, those nations become great nations. And the other nations where the politicians put in laws in favor of criminals and things which tie the hands of the police or use the police in a unjust way, well, the economy of that nation just falls apart. There is no confidence. The people do not invest into that country the fullest, that will reap the biggest reward. So unless you're a just nation, you cannot be a great nation. Genesis 18, verse 20, and the Lord said, because the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very grievous. Verse 21, I will go down now and see whether they have done altogether according to the cry of it, which is come unto me, and if not, I will know. Verse 22, and the men turned their face from thence and went towards Sodom, but Abraham stood yet before the Lord. Verse 23, and this is the beginning of Abraham's negotiations. And Abraham drew near and said, wilt thou also destroy the righteous with the wicked? Verse 24, peradventure, God, there is a chance that you don't know about, but I, Abraham, will make you aware of, that there be 50 righteous within the city. Wilt thou also destroy or not spare the place for the 50 righteous that they are in? So here we can see Abraham has passed judgment that because of the righteous, I, Abraham, am judging that spare the place. Leave the wicked be, let them continue to be wicked, don't destroy the place. To understand if Abraham was able to pass good or bad judgment, we need to look at Genesis 18, verse 24 to 32. If Abraham's judgment is bad, then it means the impact upon the people will be cruel, as the result of bad judgment ends up hurting people. In Genesis 18, verse 24, we can see that Abraham asked, as it's highlighted, not spare the place for the 50 righteous. which means let the wicked live, let the wicked continue to do wicked things. Do not destroy the place. Spare the place, he's saying. Verse 25. And now he's telling God, shall not the judge of all the earth do right? So Abraham is literally passing judgment. I, Abraham, am passing judgment that do not spare the place, let the wicked continue to do cruel things. And what is the impact of this? When the wicked, which were the majority, what is the impact? They will hurt people. So this is Abraham's judgment. And in verse 26, God says, if I find 50 in Sodom, I will spare the place. Okay, that means that's Abraham's judgment. Verse 29, and now he's gone to 40, and God says, I won't do it for 40. Verse 30, and he says, I will not do it if I find 30. Verse 31, and if I find 20, he said, I will not destroy it for 20's sake. Verse 32, and it comes down to 10, and God says, I will not destroy it for 10's sake. So you can see the impact on Abraham's judgment in the end hurts people. And so for people to think that God was cruel to test Abraham, you have to realize that Abraham's judgment, his bad judgment, is actually the result of it is cruelty upon the righteous people. And there you have it, the result of God's judgment. 2 Peter 2 verse 4. For if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell, and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment. Verse 5. And spared not the old world, but saved Noah, the 8th person, a preacher of righteousness. Verse 6. And turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes, condemned with an overthrow. Verse 7. And delivered just Lot. Verse 8. For that righteous man, just like Noah in 2 Peter 2 verse 5, a preacher of righteousness, in verse 8, so was Lot, dwelling among them in seeing and hearing. So we can see God's judgment. He saved that one righteous one. That was his judgment. And what was Abraham's judgment? That one righteous one would be oppressed by all the wicked. And what did Abraham need? He needed Proverbs 9 verse 10. He needed the fear of the Lord, because it was the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the holy is understanding. And until he took his son to slay in Moriah, that wisdom was lacking. Let's now add to Abraham's judgment versus God's judgment. At the bottom of the screen, Genesis 22 verse 2. And he said, God said, take now thy son, thine only son Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains which I will tell thee of. God has clearly passed bad judgment upon Abraham by instructing Abraham to take the life of his only own son. Because of the power God has over everyone, including Abraham, Abram has no choice but to obey. And as you, Abraham, will be the father of many nations, you will have the power over others, and they will have no choice but to obey. You, Abraham, therefore, need to know and feel the result of bad judgment. So God is saying to Abraham, how do you feel, Abraham, now, of my bad judgment, instructing you to kill your son. And if there was any doubt that God passed bad judgment on Abraham, then there you go. Genesis 22 verse 1. And it came to pass after these things that God did tempt Abraham. And the meaning of tempt, to entice or allure to do something often regarded as unwise, wrong, or immoral. And so there you go. Abraham had to get a dose of his own medicine to understand, and that was all that God was doing. It seems cruel, but he was teaching him how to pass judgment. Let us now look at Abraham's judgment at the valley of Sidom. Let's go back to Genesis 14 verse 1. And it came to pass in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of nations, which is 4 kings. In verse 2 we will see that these made war with Bera, king of Sodom, and with Birsha, king of Gomorrah, Sinab, king of Admah, and Shememba, king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, which is Zor. So you can see 4 kings that made war with 5 kings. Now, if you just a little thing, you can see all the K of the letter K is in lowercase because God is the King of Kings, and He has the honor of having the uppercase or the capital K in the word king. Number 3, verse 3, and all these were joined together in the vale of Sidom. Vale is the valley of Sidom, which is the Salt Sea. Verse 4, 12 years they served Chedorlaomer, who is the king of Elam, and he seems to have all the kings under his wing. And in the 13th year they rebelled. And we're going to skip to verse 8. And there went out the king of Sodom, and the king of Gomorrah, and the king of Admah, and the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, the same is Zor, and they joined battle with them in the vale of Sidom, in the valley of Sidom. So there was a war between the 4 kings and the 5. Verse 10, and the vale of Sidom was full of slime pits, and the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled and fell there, and they that remained fled to the mountain. Now, when God raises or reduces, when this happens, it's actually God making these things happen. And we can see 4 kings defeated 5, and so God had taken care of the wicked nations of Sodom and Gomorrah, and as they fled. And so let's see where this leads to. Genesis 14 verse 11, and they took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their victuals and went their way. Verse 12, and they took Lot, Abram's brother's son, who dwelt in Sodom, and his goods, and departed. Verse 13, and there came one that had escaped, and told Abram the Hebrew, for he dwelt in the plain of Mamre the Amorite, brother of Eshcol. Verse 14, and when Abram heard that his brother was taken captive, he armed his trained servants, born in his own house, 318, and pursued them unto Dan. Verse 15, and he divided himself against them, he and his servants, by night, and smote them, and pursued them unto Hobah, which is on the left hand of Damascus. So let's see where this leads to. So what happened in Genesis 14, verse 14, when Abraham heard that his brother was taken captive? Well, it became personal. If you see Genesis 14, verse 11 and 12, and they took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah, verse 12, and they took Lot, Abram's brother's son, who dwelt in Samaria, and his goods, and departed. So we can see from here the four kings took all the goods, including the people, and which included Lot. So they did not just take Lot, they took the lot. For Abram, this was no longer a question of righteous or unrighteous judgment. It was now they took nephew Lot, and Uncle Abram was going to free nephew Lot. Why? Because unless it's personal, you cannot feel the pain of others. And unless it's personal, you will not risk your life for others. And unless you can feel the pain of others, you cannot be a father of many nations. And when we go to Genesis 15, verse 15 at the bottom, he divided himself against them, he and his servants by night, and smote them and pursued them unto Hobah. So Uncle Abram killed for his nephew Lot. Why? Because it was personal. To understand the implications of Abraham's actions, we need to look at these Bible verses on one slide. Genesis 14, verse 10. And the vale of Sidom was full of slime pits, and the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled and fell there, and they that remained fled to the mountain. Here, the four good kings overcame the five wicked and evil kings, and they destroyed the kingdoms of the five wicked kings. Now let us read Genesis 14, verse 15. And he, Abraham, divided himself against them, he and his servants by night, and smote them being the four good kings, and pursued them unto Hobah, which is on the left hand of Damascus. Here, as we have read, Abraham killed the four good kings, and this is confirmed in Genesis 14, verse 17. And the king of Sodom went out to meet him, Abraham, after his return from the slaughter of Chedorlaomer and of the kings that were with him at the valley of Shavah, which is the king's dale. Now, has Abraham passed good or bad judgment? And has his judgment done good or resulted in wickedness and cruelty? So let's see what happened. Genesis 14, verse 21. And the king of Sodom said to Abram, give me the persons and take the goods to thyself. The king of Sodom, the wicked king, has asked Abram to give him the persons and keep the goods. Why? Because he knows that a king is not a king without a kingdom. And to have a kingdom, you need subjects, you need persons. And once you have the subjects and the persons, the subjects, will bring forth the goods. So he knew that he wanted the person. So the king of Sodom was a very cunning king. Verse 23, that I will not take from a thread even to a shoe latchet. This is Abram replying to the king of Sodom. And that I will not take anything that is thine, lest thou shouldest say, I have made Abram rich. Well, what has Abram done? Has Abram passed good judgment or bad judgment? In other words, has he freed the oppressed, or has he oppressed the righteous? Let's find out. By Abram giving back the subjects, the people of Sodom, back to the king of Sodom, Abram has restored the wicked king's kingdoms. He has taken out the four good kings and destroyed the kingdoms of the four good kings, and totally restored the wicked king's kingdoms. Not only did Abram give the king of Sodom and Gomorrah back their people, but he also gave them back their goods. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is the God that raises or reduces kingdoms. And the God of Abraham used the four good kings to reduce and smash the kingdoms of the five wicked kings. The God of Abraham freed Lot from the oppression of the city of Sodom. The God of Abraham removed Lot, and he put them with the four good kings. And now Lot was going to be free and probably flourish even more. So what did Abraham do? In the blindness of taking this personally, he restored the five wicked kings' kingdoms. Then he took Lot and he put him back in the city of Sodom, where the God of Abraham removed him from. So, now, cruel or kind, which was Abraham? Did his actions result in cruelty or kindness and goodness? Did God's actions free Lot from Sodom, or did it oppress Lot? Did Abraham's action free Lot, or put him back in prison and oppression in the city of Sodom, where wickedness ran rampant and there was no justice for the righteous? So, before we say that God was cruel to test Abraham, was Abraham's actions an act of cruelty or goodness? And if this is so hard to see unless you get revelation, which I did not until the morning of Sunday, the 10th of October 2021, how many of what have we done, oh so righteous ones, that is not too far different from what Abraham has done. And there you have it. If there was any doubt that God used the 4 good kings to destroy the 5 evil kings, including the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah and their kingdoms, Daniel 2 verse 20, Daniel answered and said, "Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his." Verse 21, and he changeth the times and the seasons. He removeth kings. He removed the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah and set it up kings. He set up the kings Chedorlaomer and the 5 and the 4 good kings. He giveth wisdom unto the wise and knowledge to them that know understanding. Verse 22, he revealeth the deep and secret things. He knoweth what is in the darkness, and the light dwelleth with him. So if there's any doubt that God removed the kingdoms of the 5 evil kings and used the 4 good kings, Chedorlaomer of Elam and the other kings, then this removes all doubt. Well, how does God remove and set up kings? As we see in verse 21, he uses kings against kings. It is important to take note of this. In Genesis 14, God had already removed Lot from Sodom. In the same chapter, Genesis 14, Abraham put Lot back into Sodom. That's Abram, sorry. Then in Genesis 19, at the bottom of the screen, God again, for the second time, got Lot out of Sodom, which proves that if you can see, hear, and understand, God will never leave you nor forsake you. So why did, in Genesis 19, God have to send 2 angels to save Lot? Because in Genesis 14, Uncle Abraham killed the 4 good kings and destroyed the 4 good kingdoms. What Abraham thought that he was doing good actually ended up being a home goal. He won the battle for Satan. As now the 4 good kingdoms were destroyed, there was nobody, no human left to rescue Lot. And so God came with 2 of his angel armies, and for the second time he removed Lot out of Sodom, and he took it personally, because when it's personal, you give your life. The Father gives his life for his Son. The Father never kills his Son. When we look at Genesis 14 verse 21, and the king of Sodom said unto Abram, "Give me the persons and take the goods to thyself," you can see how sly and cunning the king of Sodom was, just like the snake in the Garden of Eden. And when you see verse 23, how Abraham thought and spoke, that I will not take from a thread even to a shoe latcheth, and that I will not take anything that is thine, lest thou shouldest say, I have made Abram rich. You can see that Abram was playing the high moral ground, and you can see he was speaking with pure innocence, like Adam and Eve in the same Garden of Eden. So just like Adam and Eve were played, so was Abram. But the God of Abraham knows how to turn good to evil back to good. And he knows the heart of the innocent with a pure mind. For the ones who don't think and speak like the devil are the children of God, and those who think and speak with a forked tongue are the children of the devil. There's a lot of comments out there blaming God for all the evil and wrongs that happen on earth. Now, we saw that Abram killed, in Genesis 14, verse 14 and 15, killed the innocent, the kings, and then he handed back Lot to the wicked king of Sodom. Now, God is not just going to voila and jump in and stop Abraham or you from doing the wrong that you're going to do. You have to take responsibility for your actions. But when we saw Lot in Why Did God Save Just Lot? And even in this video, Lot was saved. Why? Because he could see, hear, and understand. Nothing to do with Abraham's so-called negotiations. So if you are righteous, and we saw here, God saved Lot twice. Twice he saved Lot. So God will, if provided you are righteous and you can see, hear, and understand, God will fix up your stuff up. But he's not going to jump in and stop you from stuffing up. That's your call, your responsibility, and you have to live with it. So, which brings us back to the very beginning, when Genesis 22, verse 2, God tells Abraham to take his son, his only son, and take him to the land of Moriah and go and kill your son. And Genesis to the right-hand side, Genesis 22, verse 12. And he said, lay not thy hand upon thy lad, neither do anything unto him, for now I know that thou fearest God. And repeat this. And this is the amazing thing about Yeshua, that is the hidden message in the parable. And that is, what kind of father kills his son? A father can never kill his son. A father gives his life for his son, which leads us to Proverbs 9, verse 10. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the holy is understanding. And leads us to Matthew 22, verse 36. Master, which is the great commandment in the law? Verse 37, and Yeshua said unto him, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. It is not easy to pass judgment. And we can see that Abraham had to go through this cruel test to show that it is not easy, because if you take things personally, now this is personal, this boy that you have stretched forth your hand and about to slice him up, now it's personal. And let's see how you feel. Is that the right thing to do, or is that the wrong thing to do? Obviously, that's the wrong thing to do. However, when you went and killed the 4 kings that smote the wicked, was that the right thing to do, or was that the wrong thing to do? Because it is that fear of the Lord, that am I doing the right thing or the wrong thing, that makes us so careful, that we need time to look through the evidence and not just rush into the battle that Abraham rushed into without thinking. And he undid what God had fixed to him. Remember, God told him, don't take Lot, don't take anybody with you, just go you, Sarah, and whatever you have. So Abraham did that. God then removed Lot, and the four kings had taken care of Sodom and Gomorrah. And then God had to, again, this time, send two angels, because the four kings, what did Abraham do? He took care of the four kings. Now, the four kings were not able, not in a position to take on Sodom and Gomorrah now, because Abraham had taken care of them. And so now, what did God have to do? God have to send two angels and remove Lot. And so that is what Abraham had to learn and go through to understand and to make him a great nation, a father of many nations. God bless. It just goes to prove that in Genesis 22 verse 2, then when God spoke what he spoke, it is plain and simple and easy to see, and that is very cruel, as the question was raised. However, when we see the actions of Abraham and how difficult it was to see that those actions were cruel, and so Abraham had to be taught. God taught him the best way he knew. When it's personal, then you will understand. For when it's not personal, you cannot feel what the others are going through and what you are putting them through. So to anyone who has now come up with a question, why didn't God crucify, punish, kill Abraham for killing the innocent and for wanting the wicked to be freed? Well, it goes back to Isaiah 46 verse 9. For he is God. Verse 10, and he will do all his pleasure. It was God's pleasure for him to allow Abraham to do what he did. And which leads us to Genesis 18 verse 25. Shall not the judge of all the earth do right? Unless you yourself feel you are a better judge, unless you yourself feel that in Abraham's shoes you would have made a better decision, you should not be the one to ask this question. So unless you can refer another person who is more able, then you need to ask yourself this question. All that I can say is thank God there is a God that passes final judgment. For if I am judged wrong by man, there was no God, there was no one afterwards to pass final judgment, that would be the end of it. So as it would have been on Lot. So thank God there is a God and not humans who through perception make judgments. And it happens so often on the news today, where mainstream media passes judgment before the evidence is seen. To complete the story of Lot, I'll provide links below of the video, Why Did God Save Just Lot? And Sodom and Gomorrah, I Have Two Daughters. You've been watching Mysteries of the Kingdom of Heaven. My name is Raj Singh. If you like these videos, like, share, comment, and subscribe. Subscribe to see all the 15 plus videos to date. In this video, we asked a question. Actually, a viewer asked, ACP asked the question, was God cruel to test Abraham? Genesis 22 verse 2. And we learn through the Word of God that Abraham took the lives of the innocent to save the wicked. Now, the question is, was Abraham cruel to take the lives of the innocent when they killed the wicked men of Sodom and Gomorrah? Remember, the whole Bible is a parable. You cannot read the Bible as written. And had I not got the revelation on this, I did not know how to answer this. It was only today, Sunday the 10th of October, 2021, that I got this revelation this morning, when all the Bible verses just fell into place, and I could not understand any of it until this morning, and I had no idea how to answer this question. Remember Matthew 13 verse 10, and the disciples asked Yeshua, why speakest to the people in parables? In verse 11 he says, because you need to become a disciple to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven. Verse 12, for whosoever hath, to him shall be given, and he shall have more abundance. Verse 13, therefore I speak to them in parables, because they seeing see not, and hearing they hear not, neither do they understand. And believe me, until this morning I did not understand. I do not think I could answer these questions in future as quickly, simply because I have documented my revelations, and those are basically what I'm putting my videos out on. And so I don't know, this is a fluke, whatever, but the Holy Spirit gave it to me, and so I am putting this video out. Now, the whole reason for these videos is to open your eyes to the Word of God. And remember what I always say, remember, you don't need me, you don't need man. You just need to seek the Holy Spirit and become a disciple and receive an abundance of the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, which means any truth that is given through divine revelation. God bless.